This is Matt. He works at a 9-to-5 at a large company and just received his annual performance review. Unfortunately, it wasn't great and he will end up missing his next promotion and salary bump. Now let's imagine two possibilities of what happens next. In scenario 1, Matt's worthlessness gets triggered and he enters into full-blown depression, questioning what he's doing with his life, binge watches and eats day and night, and ends up being threatened with getting fired because his performance not only did not improve but actually got worse. In scenario 2, Matt's worthlessness also gets triggered, but instead he sits with his emotions, recognizing it's both sadness and anger at play, and works through what his emotions are asking him to work through, confront his low self-esteem, and step it up at work to get himself back on track. So he does, and ends up getting the promotion he wanted and becomes more confident as a person. What sets the two realities of Matt apart? It all comes down to how we use emotions. Hello my friend, welcome to my channel. Thank you for being here. I talk about anything and everything holistically to help you uncover your potentials. Let's cut to the chase. Most of us cannot handle our emotions well because we view them as a burden and they end up using us. Science, intellect, and modern stresses in our society puts emotions at the back burner, and anytime we have to face an unpleasant emotion, we have many ways to cope. We can avoid them, we can repress them, or dissociate from them. But it's really time to change our relationship with emotions, and the most important thing to take away here is that emotions are here to help us. Even though they may seem like a drag sometimes, they're actually doing the screening work for us, like how physical symptoms like stomach aches and fevers will show to the doctors that we have underlying physical issues to work through. And what happens when we ignore and suppress our emotions is also just like how seemingly benign physical symptoms progress into cancer, diabetes, etc. And we can also start experiencing anxiety, depression, or just a perpetual state of unhappiness. So let's explore how emotions are here as resources to help us through the evolutionary lens. We all know Darwin's theory of evolution on natural selection, which paraphrased by National Geographic is survival of the fittest, because the fittest organisms, those most suited to their environment, are the ones that reproduce most successfully and are most likely to pass on their traits to the next generation. There are multiple debates surrounding this theory, but what we need to understand is that evolution just comes down to it's good enough. It may not be the best, but it's good enough to be passed down through the generations. So the same goes for our emotions. While we're just out here considering emotions to be a burden these days, emotions actually help our ancestors survive and live better, not just in the wild, but also in their families, communities, and the cultures that they also formed. On the most basic survival level, we have fight and flight responses that ensures our physical safety, summarized in a Psychology Today article stating that when we lived in the wild with monkeys and mastodons and tigers, we needed emotions in order to react quickly to dangerous stimuli. If faced with a tiger, it's better to be rocked with a fear so strong it triggers a rush of blood than to sit around and theorize about the threat. We developed an emotional system because it could induce quick responses to danger. But as we all know, fight and flight, or sometimes now known as fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, is not sufficient in our complex modern societies because relationships and social dynamics have become arguably way more complicated. We're no longer just out in the wild trying to be alive or not alive. And that's also when more nuanced emotions come into play. In Dr. Antonio Damasio's book, The Strange Order of Things, he explores how our emotive tendencies as humans evolved all the way back to the bacterial level during the genesis of life on Earth. I highly recommend this book for a more intricate understanding, but what he arrives at is that humans would have been able to use the existence of such feelings for a practical purpose, as a motive for questioning why pain exists in the first place, and perhaps to puzzle at the bizarre fact that under certain circumstances, the suffering of others could be rewarding. Perhaps they would have used the related feelings, among them fear, surprise, anger, sadness, and compassion, as a guide to imagining ways of countering suffering and its sources. They would have realized that among the variety of social behaviors available to them, some fellowship, friendship, care, love, were transparently associated with the well-being of not only others, but their own. The phrasing here is a little confusing. I don't blame him because he's a scientist, but what Dr. Damasio is getting at is that we develop emotions evolutionary in a social context, so we can signal to other people what we need, what sorts of attention and care we're seeking when we express them, and hence we can build connections of friendships and love in a human way. Without emotions, cultures and civilizations would not have come and go because we don't have that emotional pairing that allowed humans to connect on the mass level, survive and flourish better, and is the root of why there's so many of us on the planet today. And so outside of just a social standpoint though, this also applies to ourselves, where our emotions are not just signaled to others, but ultimately back to ourselves. Because we become so good at shaming emotions in our culture, this is inevitably the most important starting point. So for example, back to the opening of the video, the Matt who seized control of his life recognized that at the basis of his anger is a call to action to fight for the injustice self-conscious of not getting the promotion and working his way through that obstacle. So in short, with every emotion we're experiencing, they're actually here signaling to us what actions do we need to take. They're the antivirus to our softwares, if you will, and we cannot continue dismissing them as just things to get rid of because they were here all along to actually build on our growth and well-being. My friends, I cannot tell you how excited I was when I discovered this for myself, and it is life-changing. Emotions are not just here to F with us and control us and make us miserable, so let's actually be specific now and explore the different emotions and how they're trying to help us so we can actually use them for our own benefit. I think many of us actually subconsciously already know this, but we end up feeling stuck in the emotions and just let them control us because we actually don't know what to do with them. I found this chart online that summarizes it pretty well. I'll also link it down below, and it just goes down the list of emotions and the function of it. So for example, happiness to ensure we are motivated for the future, sadness calling for help and recoup resources, and surprise to get more information. And of course, this is a very stripped down, back to the basics chart, so we'll not cover this full spectrum of our emotions, but it is a good starting point. And unfortunately, we also got to a point in our society where we sometimes don't even know how to feel these emotions or put a name to them because of how much we avoid them. So let's get into a step-by-step method on how to make the most use of our emotions, something that we really should have been taught in school. This will be well worth your time. This is a 3-step method that in my experience works very well, and the 3 steps are to 1. Neutralize, 2. Name it, and 3. React and act. Let's walk through it. Before we can actually start using our emotions for our benefit, we need to do the absolute critical first step of neutralizing the emotion, or basically removing our judgment of what emotions are good and what emotions are bad. So for example, for many of us, we usually label angry, fear, and sadness as bad, and happiness and surprise as good. You may not necessarily know what emotion you're experiencing at this point yet, but we need to be able to look at the spectrum of our emotions from a non-judgmental lens so we give them all equal power to help us because they're all welcome. Because the moment we start labeling an emotion like sadness as bad, they become a villain, and we are only going to avoid sadness even more and actively try to suppress it without understanding how it is trying to help us. And many times, the longer we avoid or suppress it, the more of a toll and control it asserts over us. In Buddhism, this is called Vedana, or feeling, as part of the 5 aggregates, which is when we assign something that is experienced as pleasant or unpleasant, and the way we label the experience is what causes us to suffer endlessly. I think what makes neutralizing different from what other common YouTube videos talk about controlling our emotions is that here we're setting ourselves to work with our emotions rather than dominating the emotions, which in my mind still signals to the emotions that they're below us and that at the end of the day, we would still prefer if they weren't here. But here with neutralizing, we're saying no emotion is good or bad, and we recognize that each emotion is our partner or friend trying to get us to thrive and succeed in life. So go down the list of emotions, understand where your attitude is towards each emotion, and make a mental note that that is just our judgment and no emotions are unworthy of our time. The second step after we set aside our judgment is to name the emotion we're working with. This may come really easily for some people, but I think for many of us it's actually way harder than it looks. Many times we act impulsively or feel down endlessly before we name the emotion, or the emotion actually manifests in how we want to blame others or circumstances in our lives because we haven't really properly sat down to understand what character is exerting control over us. I came across this picture a few years back on some social media platform. I don't remember which one now, but what we need to understand is that we need to first untangle our emotional jumbled mess first before we can actually decipher and read into what emotion is at play and how it is actually trying to help us. So for those who are skillful at identifying their emotion, then keep doing what you're doing, most likely through journaling. But for those of us who are not used to feeling our emotions and being able to label it to its core expression, then I have 3 methods to help you depending on your style of learning. The first way is experiential. So how do you want to, or already physically expressing it? If you feel like you want to punch someone and yell at them, then you're feeling angry. If you feel like you just want to avoid the world and numb yourself and cry, then it will be sadness or fear. And if you feel like you want to talk trash about someone, then it might be contempt on the surface level that is rooted in fear and sadness depending on your situation. Imagine what that character wants to do and label it with an emotion or even multiple emotions that describe it best. The second way is intuitive. So look at the list here of emotions, which is more nuanced than the first one I showed, and scan through the list with your problem in mind. Which words jump out to you from the screen? So disgust may jump out, but it's actually tied back to the root emotion of anger, or isolation isolated may jump out and deep down is sadness at play. Go through the list and see which words float out at you, and you can start naming the emotion. And the third way is somatic, or through the body. Here you can mimic what we do in meditation, take in deep breaths, get in a comfortable position, and focus on what body parts are jumping out at you. Maybe it's your muscles feel tense all over, and that's a sign of stress or fear, or maybe your body feels numb and a lack of warmth, and that's sadness. This is a helpful chart from NPR that shows that globally people report similar bodily responses associated with a root emotion, so it might be helpful to focus inward on your body first and then look at the heat map after and see which resonates with what you're experiencing. And you can always refer back to this video for the 3 techniques on how to name your emotions in a super clear-cut way so we can start using our emotions for our own benefit. Then finally, we can react and act to our emotions so we can live to our fullest potentials. I think too many times we skip the first 2 steps and immediately go to the step of reacting without actually painting a picture of the emotions and what it's telling us to do. So the first 2 steps really help us to not only feel the emotion but also process it and shift the power back to ourselves. Once we have that crystal clear image of what it is that we are feeling, then we do have the choice then to have to choose how we want to react to those emotions. So for example, we can mindfully sit with, say, the anger or sadness, recognize it, but not let it dictate and control our actions. The key here is recognizing that when emotions do arise, then they already have arisen. So we don't have the ability to choose which emotion to feel, but we do have the ability to put the right language behind it and choose how we want to respond to them. This is the foundation sometimes seen in Stoicism and Buddhism, but in short, we need to first feel the emotion before we can distance ourselves from it and react to it in a more constructive way. We can't bypass emotions because that is just another form of dissociating, but we can learn to detach from them more masterfully once we know how to feel and name them. And from here, we can go back to the first chapter, emotions and their functions, or even better, use our own judgment to think about how to act. Some helpful guiding principles might include, what is this emotion prompting me to do, and is this what feels right to me? Why did this emotion come up, and how can the roots of it address my next step? Is there anything I can do based on this emotion, or do I just need to accept and let go of it? Is this emotion something that comes up over and over again, and what can I do about it? There are many ways to go about taking action based off your relationship with your emotion and your individual circumstance, but let me tell you, our psyche is a vast ecosystem of complex moving parts. But if you end up feeling lost, just keep coming back to this one principle, that emotions are here to help you. Use them or they will use you. Alright friend, thank you for watching this video. I hope you'll become BFFs with your emotions after this video. And again, if you need to come back to this video when you're going through something, please be sure to like or bookmark it, and I would also appreciate a subscribe for more content to uncover your potentials. Until then, take care.